Hi, this is Court Wing of Remap Therapeutics, and I'm very pleased to welcome James Close of Imperial College's Psychedelic Research Group with us today. He's really been very kind to me over the entire last year as my pursuit of this field has been just growing massively, and seeing this develop out there in the larger media world. But we've had some amazing discussions, and I really want to share his perspective on what's happening currently in like a top research university in this field. So thank you so much for being with us today, James.
Thank you, Court. Yeah, thanks. It's always a pleasure to talk about this openly with people.
I agree. So let's go into it a little bit here. Can you tell me a bit about your background and how you ended up at Imperial PRG?
Yeah. So my background is a physical therapist. I trained at Cardiff University well over 10 years ago now, and sort of followed the sort of traditional route through musculoskeletal physical therapy, and ended up doing a master's in rehabilitation essentially, and it's very pain focused. So there's a lot of pain science involved in that, and I was lucky to work under some fantastic professors at King's College in London doing that. Yeah, and then I sort of progressed onto elite sports, and eventually came around to chronic pain, and realizing that this is what I was most interested in.
Wow, that's been a similar journey for me as well. There's been quite a lot of change in pain science over the last decade and a half, hasn't there?
Yeah, it's been really I really fascinating to see how some of the groups out of Oxford, Irene Tracy's group, and how sort of fMRI is sort of starting to reveal some of these sort of brain networks involved in pain, and then of course we've got the sort of predictive processing models as well, which have starting to influence things a lot more now.
Fascinatingly. How did you end up from working with elite athletes into working at Imperial in the psychedelic research group?
Yeah. So let's go back to your original question. So I was, I transitioned from treating athletes into sort of specializing in pain after realizing that, it was infinitely interesting. And, there's really a lifetime of reading around philosophy, sensory perception and subjective experience there as well. And it was when I was sort of studying pain, and also reading some of the publications coming out of Imperial and Johns Hopkins, that I realized that there was a real potential in seeing some of the sort of interviews of some of these patients with major depression, and noticing how the shifts in their relationship to their condition was changing, and I realized that this is what we're trying to do with our patients with chronic pain, and that's when I sort of approached Imperial and have been working on them since.
Amazing. And as a direct result, you actually, if I'm correct, participated in Imperial's last study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was very, very privileged to act as a co-guide on that, and so for the last handful of patients, I had the fantastic opportunity to go in and work with the team, and that was an amazing insight and has informed a lot of what I'm doing now.
So if I'm correct, I realize that maybe this is still in development, so nothing is written in stone yet, but I believe you are pursuing a study there at Imperial involving psilocybin and fibromyalgia. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We're going through our regulatory processes at the moment and going through ethics, and we're hoping to start our small pilot study next year, and we'll be joining about 3 other groups around the world looking at similar area. Well, chronic pain.
Sure, sure. No, there's a lot of them starting to kind of, not to be funny, but kind of mushrooming up right now.
Yeah.
So, so can you describe a little bit how do psychiatric and chronic pain conditions overlap neurologically and psychologically?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting question. I mean, that chronic pain itself is a perception, you know, as are most of our subjective experiences. You know, they are perceptions and interpretations of the world around us. So there's that angle, and then we have all these sort of well recognized neurological and cortical overlaps between chronic pain and pain and depression, and you know, sort of restructuring and grey matter changes in the cortex, changes in functional connectivity in the prefrontal cortex, and the way the brain talks to each other, talks to itself essentially. And there's default mode network changes as well that we can see commonalities between both in conditions like fibromyalgia and major depressive disorder as well.
And in fact, having depression is in fact a predictor for chronic pain, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, it is, and yeah, vice versa to an extent,
right?
You know, and you can, you know, depression is, you know, if you're living with pain, you know, it doesn't go without saying that, you know, depression is normal to a certain extent.
Typically, we see a fair amount of demoralization amongst
Yeah.
people with chronic pain, understandably.
Yeah, and then we've got these, you know, these transdiagnostic measures of behavior, which is another interest of mine, particularly this idea of psychological flexibility.
Right.
And that's a measure of openness and willingness to experience, and an ability to sort of act in line with one's sort of values and things that are important in their lives. And we see reductions in psychological flexibility, or this movement towards avoidance, experiential avoidance, in most clinical conditions, including chronic pain and something like major depression as well.
Right, and that experiential avoidance is also part of what's modified with fear extinction that seems to come up between both the MDMA trials as well as the psilocybin trials, if I'm correct, and they're sort of modifying the personality trait of openness that you're speaking about right here. And so it's incredible to see this happening also simultaneously going on within the chronic pain sphere, you know, that model is coexisting, if not directly overlapping.
Yeah.
So why do we have, I mean, we're somewhat answering this right now, but why do we have strong reason to believe that psychedelics can effectively treat nociplastic conditions?
Yeah. So, you know, there's preclinical data sort of looking at serotonin agonists or serotonin 2A receptor agonists, specifically in you know mice mostly, that specifically looks at how these drugs act on the nervous system, and how they can result in changes at a sort of a spinal cord level and at a brainstem level. And so there are, you know, one of the sort of leading theories around sort of nociplastic conditions, particularly chronic pain, is this reduction in inhibitory output from the brain.
Yeah.
And that's a, you know, top-down inhibitory processes that are essentially sort of quietening the sensory input and the nociceptive input coming up. And we know that our serotonin 2A receptors play an important role in that, and can be found in sort of brain areas, sort of namely the prefrontal cortex, which are very important in assessing and regulating chronic pain. And so there's preclinical data. There's a little bit of PET data as well, which corroborates that. You know, and of course we've got the evidence from the depression data and this fMRI data that we can extrapolate into chronic pain, and that is, you know, the action that it has on the default mode network and functional connectivity in the brain as well. And so there's good reason to believe that these same processes would lead to improvements in people with chronic pain.
Wonderful. So you and I previously have discussed some of what we imagine treatment for chronic pain might look like in the future, and like things that we can take from best practices currently within both neuromuscular rehabilitation practices as well as psychedelically assisted psychotherapy. And you had this, you know, great list of things that you brought up, and I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind just kind of discussing sort of here in closing, what would best practices, speculatively obviously, do you think, what would that look like if we were doing this in practice within the medical field of integrating the use of psychedelics for neuromuscular rehabilitation?
Yeah, this is a really exciting question, and you can sort of let your imagination sort of run away a little bit. But you know, we need to start off by identifying what deficits an individual might have sort of in their current condition. And the tools we have for that at the moment is quantitative sensory testing. So that's a barrage of sensory tests aimed at establishing the effectiveness of your afferent nerves in sort of transmitting information to your brain and so on. And so that looks like sort of hot cold testing, sharp blunt testing, you know, von filament testing, a whole load of things. And so we'd want to get a good idea of where any deficits are so we can focus on them.
And that was actually, just briefly to interject there, there was recently a Nobel Prize in medicine awarded specifically to the discoverers of the receptors for cold as well as touch and nociception, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. It's all links together, yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted there, but
no, of course, no, it's absolutely fine. And I mean, we look at some of the techniques that we already have, and so, you know, we're talking about proprioceptive retraining, vestibular rehabilitation, you know, and just simple sort of exercise therapy, functional movement retraining. And so we're trying to do there, that these treatments are based in the principle of neuroplasticity. You know, we're trying to tap into neuroplasticity and reverse some of the changes that we see in nociplastic conditions, you say, or sort of chronic pain conditions as well. And so you can then see how something like psychedelics, which we have gathering evidence now that have a sort of nociplastic and they sort of improve sort of general neuroplasticity. There was this recent review from the Dutch group,
Correct.
which sort of goes through all the different plastic changes as well. And so we tap into these plastic changes, and we talk about sort of cortical reorganization, and this can be observed, you know, on functional MRI in healthy individuals and in people with chronic pain. If you use some of these neuromuscular techniques, you can actually elicit changes in cortical structure and reverse plastic changes that have happened in the cortex. And so, you know, you throw sort of classic psychedelics into the mix, and you have a potential to like a synergistic effect here, potentially.
Almost
possibly.
like an impact booster for neuroplasticity.
Yeah, that's how I think. That's how I would imagine it. You know, and so you have a window, and what we don't know now is, you know, presuming this is correct, presuming there is a window for creating change after a high dose of psychedelics, we don't know when that window is. Right. When is the best time after the high dose or during the high dose to sort of start to retrain and work on these changes. And so that would, you know, you would imagine doing this in the integration sessions as well. And so what you end up with is, you know, sort of a more of a multidisciplinary approach to psychedelic assisted therapy, you know. But what I'm also very passionate about is that it's very difficult to separate these things from that person's experience.
Yeah.
You know, just in the same way, it's very hard to untangle, you know, the functional networks between your somatosensory sort of area in your brain and your prefrontal cortex and your emotional processing as well. And so this needs to be combined with psychotherapy, and
absolutely,
specifically, I think we need to look at people's beliefs around their pain and the experience of their condition, whether it be phantom limb pain, you know, CRPS or chronic low back pain. We need to really examine those beliefs, and we need to use psychotherapeutic processes to try and help maybe offer a different perspective on them and recontextualize the beliefs, and alongside all of this other therapy that we're doing.
Completely. So good. I mean, just such a it's just talking with you, I have to say it's very affirming of like this pursuit, just to hear this perspective from someone in as well noted a research university as you know, incorporating all this and speaking of it in this trans diagnostic frame. It's wonderful. Anything else in closing here?
Just say I'm still learning a lot about this myself, you know,
of course.
And I think we all are, and we have to have a certain amount of humility here, that, you know, we're talking from a very theoretical perspective, and we need to respect that, you know, we haven't got the data yet, but we can be cautiously optimistic, and we have a we have a responsibility to, you know, temper some of the magic bullet narrative that, you know, you see sort of flying around,
For sure.
because I don't think this will, you know, cure everyone's pain. I think it can help, but you know, which is a damn sight more than what is on offer at the moment, and that's what's exciting. Yeah,
I think that's very much going to be the case. I think we'll see some people that will go into remission, and then probably the larger population of those that are, you know, potentially able to make use of this will go into some type of response rate, but we'll see an improvement, you know, based on the previous pilot studies and everything. That's what seems to be suggested right now, you know, between either people that go into complete remission or people that go into get a decent response out of it, and then some people are unresponsive, but that's typically the case with anything.
And the other thing that needs to be sort of nodded to again, it really is the Rebus model, which Robin Carhart-Harris and Carl Friston put forwards in their paper, and that is absolutely relevant to what we're talking about here. These sort of hierarchical predictive processes that are you know, potentially happening in our brain. This idea that our brain, you know, our perception of the world is essentially a controlled hallucination, and that our brain is continually sort of you know, making predictions on what's going to happen, and scrutinizing afferent information coming up as well. And so, you know, based on that model, you know, we could say that a lot of chronic pain is a clinical hallucination. It's very real for the person who's experiencing it, but, you know, what psychedelics could do in that respect potentially is help to sort of relax these sort of very what become very heavy top-down predictions on what's going on, and to help sort of give that a better balance of that sort of sensory afferent sort of error signals and predictive processes coming down as well.
That's a whole segment that's part of this that we're focusing on. So
good, lovely, thank you.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you just making the time for this, and look forward to all our future discussions and potentially collaborations. You're doing wonderful stuff.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, Court, and like really happy to talk to you about this anytime. It's a real pleasure to speak to someone else who gets it.
I know. I feel absolutely the same. Well, thanks so much, and thank you for joining us after what no doubt was a very long shift.
Thank you. Cheers, Court.
Okay,
all right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye then.